Welcome back to 33 Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Michael Abney, and today I'm joined by Peter. He's the founder of Barometer XP and Game Jesus. Or Game Jesus. Game Jesus. Game Genesis. Game Genius. Why can't I say that word? That's so funny. Oh, see, we're already playing. See, you bring the energy to the pod. Welcome, Peter. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I didn't know we were going the religious track today, so uh, I'm
I didn't either.
I'm ready to rip. Not my area of
But
expertise.
my intention when I started this was that we have fun. So we're right off the bat. So
Great.
thank you for being here. I appreciate it. It's when we talked before, it was just really interesting the dichotomy of what your background, where you came from and what you're up to. I just thought it was so completely fascinating. I thank you for being here for this conversation today. But what struck me about our first conversation was that you just didn't stumble into this world of games. You actually studied space and architecture and systems, and then you realized that games are just another form of space. You moved from professional golf to designing experiences that help people understand really complex systems and imagine change. You even sent me a game like for a business called Hive that I really found very interesting. And it really showed inside of like spaces that I was missing and made me want to get to work on those things too. So thank you for helping me with that and connecting something deeper. And I know that that's what you do in your life with your purpose and now fatherhood, another big that's another game, isn't it?
It's a really hard game. I'm learning still.
So let's just begin how I begin all of my shows is like asking you to share with me and the audience, like exactly what transformation are you in the middle of right now?
Yeah, I mean, you gave a really nice introduction. I am a dad of a almost 21-month-old now, and so
Okay.
still in that early phase of what is parenting and what do we do when you had all 24 hours to work with as an entrepreneur and now you're down to a subset where you have childcare, and it makes you revisit priorities and how you spend your days. And I think being around young kids that are just looking to learn, grow, have fun, it puts you in a playful mood a lot of the day. And so that's been a really nice refresher for me, especially if I'm deep into a project or something like that.
Yeah. It's this energy. I take it. I love the idea. I love that I'm having this conversation because I fully admit sometimes I get too serious about all of it. And when that element goes out, it's not fun anymore. And I want my life to be fun and joyful as much as possible. But it takes a certain type of focus to have that be real in the world.
Right.
I'm curious, as I let go of all of my seriousness, what is some of the things as you're stepping into these new roles, what you're up to, which we'll talk about in a minute. What have you noticed we'll take fatherhood. What do you know now that's like fallen off as over the last 20 months, 21 months? What have you noticed?
So I'm a recovering perfectionist is usually what I'll say to people.
Me too.
Yeah. Thinking about like how do you do the best in a certain circumstance. I love strategy games, and strategy games are all about, how do you find the most efficient path or the best strategy, or how do you outwit somebody? And there's a perfectionist quality to those types of games. When you're a parent, you're kind of like, I want to do the best I can do, but I got to give myself some grace. And so I think one of the things that has been both positive as a mental health piece is just kind of shedding a bit of that perfection and saying, all right, yes, there's dangers everywhere for this 21-month-old, right? He's walking around, running around. He's
Mm,
got a bunch of snow and ice a few weeks ago, and he's outside like slipping and falling. And as long as I can control he's not going to seriously hurt himself, but like he can go kind of learn.
yeah.
There is that piece of play where, you learn through doing and just leaning into that he does, right? So it's just interesting to reflect on how I show up in games, how I like to be a part of different conversations, different spaces, and watching a mini me run around with kind of the same reckless abandon that I remember when I was a kid.
Do you see it already in him?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like mannerisms and ways that he says certain words and things now. It's just it feels like I'm talking to a mini version of myself at times. And then there are other moments where I'm like, oh, there's mom. And so it's really neat. It's just a fun age. That personality really starts to come out.
I love it. That must be cool. And for you to see it because a lot of times it's harder for us to see like ourselves than anything, but you're seeing that. Does your wife also see it too? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
who
It's
knows?
really neat to see how both of us show up in him. My dad was a pediatrician. My mom works in education. And so like I was around a lot of kids and like heard stories and parents being like, "Oh my gosh, look, it's like a miniature version of myself." But until you actually have it happen to you, you don't understand the weight of how true that is. So we're having a blast. We're not sleeping a lot, but we're having a blast.
Are you playing any golf?
I'm playing golf more recreationally now between being a parent and having a couple businesses that I'm working on. Not a ton of
Yeah.
free time, but I like to get out when I can.
When did you start? When did you start playing professionally?
So I turned pro about a year after college. It was I had a really nice summer of amateur golf right after college that got me a couple of exemptions the following year, and I had to stay amateur to take those exemptions on the PGA Tour. And so I stayed amateur and turned pro. What is that? 2013. It was a as you were talking about, like the transition from like, this is my hobby, this is the thing that I really love, to all of a sudden now it's a job is an interesting transition. Like if we had had this conversation a decade ago, I would have been in a very different sort of transitional point, which is how do you make something that's your job fun after it being basically a
Fun.
game for your entire life?
What did that teach you about that? Like, that's a really interesting question that
Yeah.
I yeah,
I
what
so when I
about that and about
Yeah,
community? Like, what
yeah.
did it teach you about those 2 aspects when you did that flip?
I
And
think
then maybe flip how you flip back
And then
too.
how I flip back, exactly.
Yeah.
One of my I think one of my biggest reflections as I stepped away from golf and started pursuing more of the game design and facilitation stuff was how when I was little, I would go out, I'd practice, I would just mess around, I'd have fun, right? I'd play. When I was practicing, yes, there was a serious component of like, I need to work on these different types of skills, or I need to go into these types of conditions, or get ready for these types of tournaments. And there was a method to that madness. But at the end of the day, when I went and practiced, like I was doing kind of fun trick shots and I was like going out with friends and we were playing just like games that you would never play in a tournament, just because it opens that aperture to, oh, maybe this is a new thing that I could do that would really get me excited about working on this sort of like less fun skill that you've got to practice, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, it was as I turned pro, there was a lot more kind of like requests of your time and the things that you needed to do, whether it was with a sponsor. I was sponsored by Nike for most of my pro career, or, doing a few charity tournaments, or, you know, taking a handful of interviews or talking to the media or whatever it might be, those things cut into that time. And so you felt like you had a smaller set or window to do the work that you needed to do. And then you add that on top of the fact that you're playing more tournaments when you're a professional. You've got to take care of your energy. And so you can't go out and just like play for 19 hours and then come home and be like, oh yeah, I got to go, play in a tournament tomorrow and I'm really tired. So you had to sort of structure your schedule in a way that was a little bit more professional.
Did it affect how you were having fun or your game?
It did a little bit. I got injured early in my career too, my pro career. And so that certainly didn't help. But I definitely, when I took a step back and I went and did more of the like physical therapy that I needed to do on my hand, which I hurt, I found I was like, you know what? I haven't been doing the things that really make this as fun as it could be for me. And so, how, if I
Mhm.
were to make a transition back into golf, if I got sort of over my injury, what would I want to change? And ultimately, it
Oh,
was playing with more friends. It was being more social. It was trying the things that I was trying when I was a kid, and thinking about my schedule in a little bit more of a spaced out kind of way. Don't play a tournament every week or don't play that often, but like really make it special when you go out. And that I think has sort of rechanged the relationship for me. And so I've taken that and sort of bottled it up as I've gone into this next phase of my life.
when did it hit you about games and using that as a platform or structure for creating social impact?
So I would say I recognized games as a really important medium pretty early in my life. As I grew up around a bunch of educators, and I learned pretty early in my school career that lecture based school was not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I wasn't the kind of kid who was like, "Yeah, I'll listen to you for an hour and a half." No, I just my
No,
attention
no.
wasn't like that, and I wanted experiential learning. So whether it was at home building a board game with my mom, and it was about something either frivolous or serious, it was just an opportunity to explore different game mechanics. And for me, that meant understanding how I learned best and the types of games that would really help me thrive. And then going and playing with my friend who was right up the street from me and recognizing that his way of learning and his preferred games were totally different than mine. And so, in order for us to play together and both have that learning experience, we would need to sort of meet in the middle or find those games that overlapped.
Mm.
Golf ended up being one of those, which was really neat for me because I got to sort of teach a friend how to play golf from the start. But that's the kind of thing that I started seeing pretty early. And then as I went to college and studied architecture and geography, I was really interested in that sort of people and places intersection. How do you design spaces or experiences that make people think or make people behave differently? And as you start to see some of those case studies or those projects that play out, you can kind of apply that same reasoning, right? Oh, wow, these four people really enjoyed this experience because it sort of spoke to them in the mechanics of the game. And these people really like the experience because they like the aesthetics of the room, right? And so you get to see through just new experiences how people respond. And that iteration, I think, is just so interesting.
I'm fascinated by space design, like how what we were talking about in the context, but I want to, we all have different perceptions about what space is. And probably about 10, 15 years ago, I became really present to how my physical space was, like where I was working, or it's mainly like where I live, how that space was constructed, how I was constructing and designing it. I've always loved design, but like how it affected me. And, there was a time in my life where I could, move apartments in the trash bag in the back of my car. And then there was like, no, then there's structure. It just shifts. I'm curious about how, like, how do you describe it for people when you're sharing in the context of what you do in designing games?
I think, I mean, there plenty of people smarter than I who could probably define place and space in a very specific definition. I think for me, space and designing space is one of the most intimate things that you can do in a relationship or in a community because you are creating both the how are people feeling, the emotional connection to that space or that area. You're creating a like cognitive system where like how are people going to interact, right? And think about like what are they seeing, what are they experiencing, and then there's this sort of like, well, how do I want to respond to this, the sort of behavioral side of space. And for me, tapping into those three pieces, right, there a lot of when you're thinking about mental health or mental well-being, you'll talk about how we feel, think, and act. And so when you design space, if you think about one of those things at the sort of loss of the other two, you walk in, you sort of feel like something's
Yep.
missing, right? You don't feel engaged in the way that you could be. And so, really, like, kind of sitting there and saying, all right, what do I feel like is missing? What would make this space better for me? And then start asking around other people, is that clear to other people, the other people looking for something else? And that for me is a really nice connection into game design because when you're doing play testing, you're oftentimes asking similar questions. It may not be a physical room, right, that you're in. It's a kind of like a safe space that you've created for playing a game. Maybe it's at a table, maybe it's an escape room where you actually have created something more immersive. But when people go through that play test, you're asking a lot of those same how do you feel, how do you think, how do you act questions. And it never ceases to amaze the things that you think you know as you go into a play test. And then all of a sudden you come out the other end and you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, I should have thought about that when I was designing the draft.
Yeah, because there's so much focus on virtual games. And is that something that you do as well? Because, or is it more physical?
It's more physical for me. There's something about having a tangible experience, whether it's like having pieces in your hand or like being in a space physically, that I don't think the VR, AR world has quite captured yet, though I know it is a different kind of space and some people really love it. I'll help advise. Some of the concepts definitely transfer to the digital space. I can't create or design that space as well. Not a coder. Don't I could now, and I guess the AI world, start to vibe code and start thinking about how to explain it in plain
Mm.
English. No, I've found a lot more enjoyment in the physical world.
Does how does intention overlay into, since we're on that subject of the physicalness and the tactileness of it, which I appreciate, board games, I used to love them when I was a kid, but then as I got in as an adult, it's probably because I took life so seriously for so long that it was just very difficult for me to allow myself to even have that experience because, the second I sat down at a game and I realized somebody was really competitive, I was like, "Ugh, I'm so over this. But
Yeah,
like,
it's a great reflection. Yeah.
and digital games, I grew up when like it was just, Donkey Kong and,
Mm.
the very simple ones. But at the same time, or Miss Pac-Man, yeah, that was my favorite. But seriously, that's just like it's so not compared to what I'm aware of that people play now with those other games. It's like, oh my God, how the hell is shooting people a game? Like yeah, don't have any part of that. But like it's just fascinating to observe the different concept of what people realize or accept as a game. Yeah.
It's I find that in the physical game world, there are tons of different sub communities within gaming. In the tabletop space, you have everything from role play and like live action kind of worlds, right? Where you go and explore an idea or a
Yeah.
theme or a story with people. There are the tabletop games that you'll play at a party, right? The party games, they're the long strategic form games where you're trading resources. Maybe it's a legacy game that lasts for like the entire pandemic, right? Like the idea of playing games is so wide and there are different communities that sort of gets absorbed into. I've always found that tabletop games are much faster to prototype. And so there are a lot more games in the world that I feel like can go wide with different mechanics and dynamics. And from an intentionality standpoint, I could get a group into a board game or a card game or a social experience a lot faster than I can get them into a digital experience. I'm sure there are other people who are sort of flip flopped on that. But when I think about intention and like if I'm going to go to a happy hour and try to socialize after a 4-year hiatus of a pandemic, right, where I haven't had to talk to someone in a bar for, that long of time, some skills have atrophied, right? Like I've lost my ability to connect with someone in real time and like see their kind of micro expressions on their face and start to read a conversation. And so I need to practice that again. And games offer you that that mode. Um, and online, there are ways that you can set up similarly. Like we've done a bunch of trainings in the work
Mm.
that I do now, where we'll do virtual, facilitation trainings or leadership workshops. And reading people on a box like we are right now is a little bit trickier than seeing the peripheral of the room and being like, ooh, this person's starting to like nudge away from me and start walking over here. And this person's feet are the other direction, right? It's hard to know that. And so there's just, I think, a little bit more dynamism to the conversations when you're in person.
Yeah.
That's
I find that fascinating. And I'm loving that it almost feels old school. Like I love the the way you explain the elements of what you're creating makes it very real. It reminds me of um I'm a nerd with like old books and old texts about, the turn of the century last century, about people that wrote books about one of my favorite ones that comes to mind is a book by Florence Scovel Shinn about playing the game of life like it's a game, like life is a game. So that's like kind of like you're bringing that up for me. So I'm gonna have to go back and read that again because again, I had that. No, it's not. It's not a game. It's like totally serious. But as I get older, yeah, it could totally be anything I want. So thanks for like bringing that aspect up to it. And when we were talking, you had this aspect, you had this other aspect that I want to kind of dive into about, your background. And you share with me that you come from a family with 6 generations long of philanthropy that's now you're spearheading or involved in. And how does that fit into the elements that all the game that you're playing,
yeah.
the game of life that you're playing.
So it's been a real privilege to be connected to a multi-generation family foundation. Obviously, there is a lot of financial and social security that comes along with that. And I think it's worth stating, especially given my line of work, which is it's a little less predictable than say a 9 to 5 job that you can get a nice salary and like live the life that you're aiming to live, right? So I've been able to take a few chances that maybe other people wouldn't have the same ability to do. younger in my life, right? And it also has opened up my experience to know the types of initiatives that people are working on, the types of struggles that people are going through with nonprofits, around the country. And when you're connected to any kind of philanthropic vehicle, whether it be a giving circle or foundation, or maybe you're helping volunteer, you stand on a board, all of those are opportunities to meet people who you may not otherwise meet or learn about the things that you could do to help your community. And it's a lens that's always been there because I was invited into, I think, my first meeting when I was 12. And so like when you're 12 years old and you sit in a meeting and you're listening to like various nonprofits that are, requesting with a proposal for some funds to support a program, and then you're able to go see that program in action and like lives are changing because of it. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to see and pretty informative for a young kid. And so I think for me, it's trying to connect that experience that I've had the privilege of having and making it more accessible for other people. And games are the sort of conduit that I try to do that through, right? So whether it's building a game for a particular cause to build awareness in a community or to connect unlike people and say like, hey, you guys care about the same thing, but you might not otherwise come together if we didn't play. And then next thing you know, they're launching a venture, or they've created a new program, and that creates that ripple effect in a community because you have those larger, more interconnected networks. And so philanthropy is just, I mean, it literally means love of human, right? And so just thinking about how do you use games to tap into the power of that. I think there's a level of loneliness if you don't know other people who are in that position. And I say that from, again, a place of privilege, right? Because they're, having some status or influence or, control over
Hmm.
funds and going in different directions is something that you sort of learn through experience. There isn't necessarily a school for it, right? There might be classes, nonprofits, especially the ones that serve other philanthropic serving institutions, right? They might have workshops, or there's a wonderful organization that works specifically with family foundation trustees. And so you could find places to learn, but it really comes through experience and then sharing those stories with other people in similar positions. And for me, I think the biggest challenge is always the lack of transparency in the space. There's a huge power dynamic, right? When you have basically a flow of funds going from someone who has them to someone who's looking for them. And in games, there are a lot of power dynamics that are pulled out depending on what game you choose. And so there are some really nice reflective conversations that you can pull from a game and then connect them into, well, you typically are on the high side of this power dynamic. What if we flip the script, right? And like, how does that change your empathy toward other people or the folks that you're serving? And so for me, I think one of my kind of big quests is to try to make philanthropy more accessible for people. And so I helped start a giving circle in the Washington, D.C. area about 5 years ago. And it's, again, the idea is to sort of bring new people into a space to see it from the other side, because the more people that have those shared perspectives, the more conversations you can generate.
Observation from your place of observation, from your love of designing games and the spatiality. What do you think from your perspective? Why is it so hard for people like me sometimes to let go and allow themselves to intentionally play in the game of whatever it is that they're playing in life?
Probably a multi-pronged answer to that. I think for some that I've seen sort of in the work that we've been doing, it's their experience with games have not been very positive, right? Whether you run into a bullying situation or they're too competitive and you want to be more collaborative, or you
Hmm.
come in with the expectation of, just having fun with people, and then you get like, broadsided by your boss who like comes in and asks you that like pointed question of like, oh, this is why it always happens at work this way. And you're like, oh, no, I wasn't here for that kind of commentary.
Hmm.
So I think the negative experiences of how people connect games to their life or games to work or games to their community. I think there's
And they're,
another part,
hmm
which is kind of like people see games as a bit of a bubble. It's kind of a world that they want to step in when they're ready to step into it. And if you sort of connect it into a space that's more professional and more of the like, this is my other world that I make my living with, there's a risk to that, especially if you're less
yeah,
secure in that position. So those are like two pieces.
yeah.
And I always encourage people to find time to play when you can, because if you can find those little moments and then reflect on those moments, it starts to build a bit of a sort of confidence ladder, right? To say, oh, I tried this game. by myself. I feel pretty good about it. Maybe I can find someone else to play with. Maybe I can find a community to play with. Oh, maybe I could bring this into my team because I've learned so much from it. Like those little steps
Yeah.
are the kind of nudges that help.
Yeah. And I'm sure we all have had I certainly have. And when you're talking about it, kind of brings up like the times you didn't make the team,
Mm.
and kind of leaves you with, X. But the beautiful part about being a human being is we can write our new stories as soon
That's
as we
right.
become aware of it. But it's you also can close yourself completely off to it because of whatever, happened way back when.
Yep.
So thank you
And I
for
think
this
that
is
is a bit
great.
of the allure, right? Like the idea of
Yeah.
stepping into a new role for a game, right? Whether it's a first person shooter game, which I think are very popular online, right? To uh,
Shooter game.
action role
Wow.
play, right? Like when you step into that world, you're like, I can be anyone. And there's
Yeah.
a real allure to that until it starts to break into that bubble of like, wait, this is real life now. And so like the transition spaces and like how you can facilitate through that, I think is a real skill. So that's a
Yeah.
lot of the work that I'm doing is like trying to help people facilitate it.
I love how just having a conversation about it sparks just a lot of contemplation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what conversations are for. I think that's why they're so completely fascinating. I do want to wrap back around though and ask you about being a dad and like what becoming a parent and how that shifted your sense of purpose or has it?
I mean, and it's it's hard to know how it wouldn't shape my purpose. It was a fairly kind of like long, intimate discussion with a partner, right? To be like, is this something that we want to do together? And then once you've decided, it's kind of like, all right, we want to take care and make the best of this situation. Like, how can we support this little guy as much as we can? And then you start to recognize that there is going to be a balance between your own mental physical health and their mental physical health, and like how you sort of merge those worlds together,
Mm-hmm.
find ways to make your smaller window of work time work and your smaller window of recreational things you can do for fun work. And I to me that can turn very quickly into an optimization challenge, which can really make parenting difficult. And so I think there's a level of spontaneity that I always need in my life. And so whether that's being goofy with my son or having those moments where I can carve out for friendship or going on a date with my wife, right? So just like being intentional about time, I think is the biggest shift. And then like I said, I get to play all day long at work. So I'm already energized when I'm, step out the office bedroom door here and then go and I get to play for a couple hours with my son or make him food or something that just kind of brings me joy. So finding little hobbies that can work within the new time structure.
Beautiful. What's clearer to you now than it was 21 months ago?
Probably I need to take more care of myself. I think when you're an athlete, you have so much downtime. There's so much time that you can sort of sit there and say, "Oh, I could go to the gym and like work out and get physically
Mm-hmm.
stronger. Oh, I could go meditate, or I could go have this sort of like peaceful, go sit by the ocean." I used to live in Florida when I was playing golf. I can go do whatever I want to do to like to take care of myself because I have the time to do it. And so the challenge of being an athlete is more you fall into these like lulls of like, what do I do? Like there's so much open space and it's sort of like analysis paralysis in that way. But with so much on your schedule as a parent, you really have to be intentional about that time now. And so I think that's the clarity that I'm working toward, right? You never really get
Yeah,
all
we're
the way.
we're always in the middle of it, but
Yeah.
that makes total sense and maps onto what you said about when you went to became a professional golfer. So, Peter, are you ready for your closing question?
I'm so ready.
Okay. If someone's listening and feels disconnected or stuck in their own rigid system, what would you invite them to play with this week?
All right. So I shared a bit about the sort of like when you walk into a space, there's an emotional connection to something. There's the sort of like cognitive, like how you think about it. And then there's the behavioral, like how do you respond, right? I would invite people to play a game that taps into all three of those modes and reflect around, did you like one more than the other? Is there something that gives you more energy? Is there something that takes energy away from you? Right. And I like you to think about when you're playing that game, emotional games get you laughing, connecting, socializing with people, right? Thinking games get you into that sort of strategy headspace. How do I outthink or outcommunicate somebody? And the reaction games are more of those like dexterity, it's improv, it's the things that you're doing in real time, right? And they could be all in one game, right? There are games that have those feel, but there are also different games that could fit into those buckets. And so if you have a minute, 10 minutes, right? Try a new game, try a game you've played before, but ask yourself the question, what brought you energy from that game?
Okay, that's very interesting to take on. Okay, I got it. Very powerful too. Thank you so much for reminding all of us that transformation doesn't have to start with being forced. You can be an invitation, and sometimes it just does start with, "Hey, I'm gonna go play right now." Thanks for bringing that to the fore, and everything, all of the dynamics really made for a really interesting conversation today. And I thank you for having it with me. 'Cause that's why we exist, to explore the humans behind what they're building and creating in the world. And the intentional design and spaces that you're creating for others to thrive is really awesome to witness and get to have a conversation with. And a reminder that play might just be the doorway back to our something that's possible that we didn't know was possible before. So consider this your opportunity, guys. If you're listening out there today, to stop taking life so damn seriously, I'm going to be doing that, and find that inner kid in all of us and just go take a recess and have an amazing day. We will see you all on the next one. Bye, everyone.